Got it.
Stop the recording. And then stop the recording, and then that way it's ready to go.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Sorry, guys. Sorry, everyone. I had some technical issues. Sorry, guys, I had some technical issues, but we're on now. I'm just admitting everybody. Just a second. Give me just a second, guys. I am admitting everybody. Sorry, I had some technical issues. Okay, so I'll just admit people as I go. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Just unmute yourself if you ever have a question along the way. I'll be glad to answer anybody's questions. Let me make sure I'm admitting everybody. I just got to keep an eye on this admit screen here. All right. Unmute yourself if you have any question, but here we go. I'll just keep an eye on my screen. Make sure that nobody else needs to join. Okay, sorry I was late. I was not late. I had technical issues. It wouldn't let me log in for some reason. I use my own Zoom for my mentees that I have. I'm a mentor with Texas United Realty. And I use my own Zoom for my personal mentees that are under me. And then when I do the company wide, I have to log into a different Zoom account, and it didn't like me today. So, but here we go. My name is Ryan Hygic. I've been a real estate agent for 18 years. I've been with Texas United Realty for going on 7. We are also United Real Estate as well. So welcome all. Texas United TUR is also United Real Estate. So Texas United Realty and United Real Estate is all one. And I welcome each and every one of you and more that hopefully come on board. I'm just keeping an eye on anybody else that might want to pop on. Okay, so today I'm talking about contracts, specifically the HOA addendum and the buyer representation agreement. And when do we use them and how do we use them? Okay, so I'm going to enter matrix here. We're going to pick a random property. There's always this read stuff. So when you go to search, you can kind of search properties in a certain zip code or whatever. I'm going to pick my zip code that I live in. And there's 73 in the zip code that I live in. I'm going to pick a random one. Park Meadow. Here we go. I didn't like the other two. I didn't like their names. That was the only reason I didn't pick them. But anyway, here we go. Let's see if it's if it needs a HOA addendum. Go down. Management company HOA name. Yes. Memorial Parkway. So it is in an HOA. Hint, most houses in a neighborhood are going to have an HOA. What if you're listing a property and you don't know if it's in an HOA? Good question. A, you can ask the seller because they've obviously been making the yearly payments or the quarterly payments to the HOA. Or B, you can ask your friendly title company. Example, a title company you have a relationship with or a title company that might be close by. when I pick a title company for a listing, I have several title companies that I like. The reason being is I try to pick a title company that's relatively close to my listing, because your sellers are probably not going to want to drive halfway across town to go to closing. I get it. It's only a one-time deal, usually, knock on wood. But I say that because I've had my buyers go to a closing twice before, because the first time anyway, long story. But anyway, what happens is they don't want to drive halfway across town. So bottom line. Okay, so this one is an HOA. Usually in the country, they might not have being an HOA. So, or a mandatory membership in a homeowners association as the addendum. So let's figure out when do we need a buyer's representation agreement? Always. Okay. When you're representing a buyer or a tenant. So let me get a dot loop going here. You can use dot loop, transaction desk. I personally like zip forms. I teach my mentees on dot loop, so this is just kind of my go-to. But anyway, I'll kind of show you. Let me log into my personal account. So Park Meadow, I'm going to add a loop. I'm going to put in the address 719. By the way, if you don't have an address yet, because your buyer hasn't picked a home yet, then just put in your buyer's name in here, John Smith, and just hit continue. Park Meadow, it actually found it. I'm going to click. Yeah, I can import the data, sure. Hit continue. This is going to be a buyer transaction, so representing the buyer. Trick question. When you see the HOA addendum in the MLS under attachments, it's already filled out by the listing agent. How many of you think you have to use that addendum if it's posted on the attachments? How many of you think that you have to use it? Yay, nay? You don't have to answer the question. I'll answer it for you. No, their answer is you do not have to use it. It's negotiable. So let me show you one of my listings. My attachments, I actually put in here, the HOA transfer information. What, right here. Ryan, how did you get that information? You don't know that every neighborhood by heart. No, I do not. That's why I cheat and I use the title company. And I literally asked her, what is the HOA transfer information and what's required to transfer the property? We're going to learn there's a couple of different things that may be required to transfer the HOA into the new buyer's name. Okay. And not necessarily always a transfer fee. That you would think, but there's some caveats to that. We'll get to that. So hold on to your horses. Why, Ryan, did you post this up front with your listing? Why did you do all the work of getting the research up front? Well, first off, it wasn't a lot of work. I emailed the title company that I was using. Secondly, I want to know what it is and what's required, because that will play into the negotiations of the contract. This one, for instance, is not that much. It's 150 transfer fee, and the HOA requires a resale certificate on every one of their deals, but it's 175 bucks. So we know what, under $500, and the property can be transferred. Now, don't get this mistaken. This is not the HOA yearly fees. It is a transfer for the HOA requires additional fees to transfer the property from the seller's name to the buyer's name. You're like, wait a minute, that sounds a little fishy. It's not fishy, but it is a way for them to make extra money. It's plain and simple the truth. So because they have to do a little bit of paperwork to transfer the property's ownership, they're going to charge you for that, or charge the buyer or the seller. It's negotiable. Let's get to that. View loop. I'm going to get straight to the point here because I know we want to keep this pretty short. In dot loop, Most of your items you need to write up a contract and the addendums are already going to be populated into here. Of course, you can add anything else that you may be missing by hitting add folder. Here's a little tip. Hit templates, go to the second to the bottom one, Texas Realtors Interactive Documents. That's your master folder. So let's say you're missing the wire fraud form, just hit wire, it'll pop up, hit copy and hit OK. And it'll add to your file. Okay, that's not really what this Zoom class is about. We're going to get to the mandatory membership and homeowner association. So let's say it's already posted on here. You have to use that one that the listing agreement agent posted. No, they're going to kind of slate it to their seller side, not your buyer side. It's negotiable. Okay, so let's find it in all these addendums. Give me just, here we go. Let's go over it. I want to autofill because I wanted to add in the address. So the address is added. Item subdivision information. So you're saying, Ryan, I don't really care about the subdivision information or the HOA. The buyers can find that themselves. Well, it's your job to give them all the information that they need that's packaged with the house. So including subdivision information, which may be deed restrictions. What if they want to do something to the property that the deed restrictions don't allow? Well, in their option period, they need to figure out if they allow it. That's why you always need to be asking questions. Hey, are you going to be wanting to put a pool? Are you going to be wanting to change anything with the front of the house or add a porch, add a patio? Because the deed restrictions may prevent some of that sometimes. Typically, they will allow certain things like a pool or a covered back porch, but it has to be approved by the HOA first. HOAs have a lot of control in the neighborhood. So subdivision information is important for your buyer to get. Subdivision information means a current copy of the restrictions. I just said deed restrictions, which is the bylaws and rules of the association, and a resale certificate. A resale certificate is basically an information affidavit that the HOA management company fills out that kind of explains the HOA. It explains their finances. It explains if they have a board. It kind of explains a lot of different things. It might explain some budget. It might explain some other things. So it might explain if there's a capitalization fee. A capitalization fee is for improvements or repairs that sometimes is a one-time fee at closing. Sometimes there's a special assessment fee. So meaning a one-time fee that's just placed on the homeowners to do maybe a large project, like maybe they want to put a new brick or concrete wall because a big freeway or something is on the side of the neighborhood. So now they want a noise barrier. So they're going to charge all the homeowners an equal fee or a one-time fee, which is to basically pay for that wall. So the capitalization fee, though, is usually charged to your buyer at closing for future endeavors or repairs or modifications, maybe a new park or a new restroom or something that they want to put in the future. Usually to do with the common neighborhood good for the common neighborhood. So I know Bridgeland charges a capitalization fee at closing. I know they do because I just did one of those. So back to the point. Special assessment is basically if they need something done in the neighborhood and they're going to charge a one-time fee. This is not really talking about that. This is talking about, we'll get to the capitalization fee as well in a minute that's charged at closing. So does your buyer want or need a copy of this? Sometimes they don't necessarily want it, but we'll get to that in a minute, but sometimes their lender requires it. Most in a condo, I can tell you that the lender is always going to require a resale certificate. Sometimes even in a subdivision, the lender or the title company will require the resale certificate, even if the HOA doesn't require it. In my listing, that I posted, that I told you about, the transfer. That's the mud, sorry. The transfer, it actually, the HOA requires the resale certificate. It's mandatory. Okay, so either the lender might require it, the title company may require it, or sometimes the HOA requires it. Okay. So, and then we'll get back to, and just remember, the capitalization fee is for future improvements or repairs. The transfer fee is what the HOA charges to transfer the property from one to another. Okay. And the resale certificate is basically an inclusive package that kind of gives a description about the neighborhood that has all the fine details that the lender may want to see before they place their lien for that particular property. Okay. Or fund for it, basically. So check one box only. Within blank days after the effective date of the contract, seller shall obtain, pay for, and deliver the subdivision information to the buyer. That means they will deliver this information right here to the buyer. Okay. Meaning they will contact the HOA, and they will get this information for your buyer, or they'll contact the title company and ask for assistance in obtaining this information. Seller shall obtain, pay for, and deliver. If seller delivers the subdivision information, buyer may terminate the contract within 3 days after buyer receives the subdivision information, after they receive this, or prior to closing, whichever occurs first, and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. So if seller delivers the subdivision information, basically the buyer has a right to review it with 3 days to review it, and they may terminate, because there may be something in there like a deed restriction that they don't agree with, or meaning they don't not agree with it. They just don't want, meaning they can't change something to their property. Maybe it says you can't paint any brick in the subdivision, like you cannot paint the brick at all, but they were wanting to paint the red brick a white color. And that may be a reason they went out. Whatever the reason is, they have 3 days. Okay. What do you place in this line? It just depends. I mean, I usually put 10 days, but again, because if there's something they don't agree to, they have 3 days to back out. Now you're saying, Ryan, why don't you just put 2 days in there? Well, because that's probably unrealistic. I mean, you can, but that's probably unrealistic for the seller to obtain all that information from the HOA in 2 days. The HOA companies they're not always that fast. Let me tell you. I think there is a new rule coming out that they have to be more proactive than they used to be, meaning they have to have a certain time frame to deliver documents. But that used to not be the case. So yeah. But anyway, I would give them at least 10 days to deliver that. Now, second box, within blank days, buyer shall obtain, pay for, and deliver, meaning you're saying, well, Ryan, in this hot market, the seller may not want to pay for one more thing. I'm not going to add that to the contract. Well, okay, I'm with you. Well, then you can mark box 2. The buyer would still have to pay to obtain the resale certificate, which in this case would be $175. But they would still have their 3 days to back out. Let me caution you on that box. It's a box you can check, but I would contact the title company and ask how much this would cost the buyer to obtain a copy of the deed restrictions. Usually the restrictions doesn't cost any money. It's the resale certificate that costs money. And sometimes it's not $175. Sometimes it's $500 or more. So if your buyer says, I don't care, I'll pay for it, I just want to be able to back out if there's something in there that I don't like. Well, then, okay, give him 10 or 15 days to obtain that information. I say him, then you're going to be the one that's going to have to contact the title company and obtain this information for them. They're not going to want to do it. They're going to expect you to do it because you're their agent. Okay. So within 3 days after receiving the subdivision information or prior to closing, whichever occurs first, it says prior to closing because the buyer can't back out after closing because they've already closed. And the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer if they have 3 days to terminate. And obviously you have to do the termination of contract and the release of earnest money. It has to be in those forms. You can't just verbally say it. Verbal doesn't cut it these days, guys. If required, buyer may, at buyer's sole remedy, terminate the contract within 3 days after the time required or prior to closing, whichever comes first. So, meaning, what if you put 10 days in this line and the buyer still can't get the information they need from the HOA? That could happen. The HOA, I'm sorry, but we can nag them. And of course you want to follow up, but sometimes they're on their own schedule. It says, if required, if buyer, due to factors beyond buyer's control, is not able to obtain the subdivision information within the time required, meaning within the 10 days, buyer at buyer's sole discretion may terminate the contract within 3 days. So meaning by the 13th day of the executed contract, buyer can back out.
Okay.
Because they may be like, well, I didn't get a chance to review the HOA deed restrictions, and that was a major, that was major for me. And so they have the option. Okay. And this is, guys, an extra extension. This is not, your option period is one thing. This is beyond that, depending on the timeframes of your HOA, because you're negotiating the time frame. You may put 20 days in here. And the listing agent may go, I don't think so. That's giving you 23 days to back out. Like, I mean, but again, let me stress that once your buyer gets the subdivision information, they have 2 days from that point. You understand? So if they get it within 5 days, then they only have 3 additional days to back out. Oh, due to the deed restrictions only, or the HOA resale certificate and subdivision information. So that means they only have the 8 days. This doesn't, you don't have till the 20th day just because it says that. Now, if they get it on the 20th day, if that's in the addendum, then they get the additional 3 days. But the listing agent, I guarantee, is not going to allow that box to have 20 in it. They're going to negotiate and probably cut it down to 10. Okay. So it's all negotiable. They may not even want this box checked. It's just negotiable. Or if you check the seller box, they may bring it down and check the buyer box because they want the buyer to pay for it. If I was the listing agent, I would say you can add the subdivision information all you want, but the buyer's going to pay for it. But if I'm the buyer's agent, I'm going to try to get the seller to pay for it. If it's a multiple offer situation deal, you may have, if you want to win the bid, guys, I'm being serious with y'all. Like there's school and there's street knowledge. And I'm telling you, when in a multiple offer situation, some of the stuff the buyer just ends up having to pay for it if they want the house, if it's multiple offers. Negotiate how you want, guys, but it's sometimes if there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 offers. So I'm just telling you the facts. You are the ones to figure it out with your buyers. Okay, so box 3, buyer has received and approved the information before signing the contract. That means buyer received the information. Okay. Buyer does or does not require an updated resale certificate. It might be an outdated resale certificate. If buyer requires an updated resale certificate, seller at buyer expense. Remember, box 3 says that buyer's expense shall deliver it to, but the seller shall deliver it to buyer within 10 days after receiving payment for the updated resale certificate from the buyer. Buyer may terminate this contract and earnest money refunded to buyer if seller fails to deliver the updated resale certificate within the time required, which is 10 days. So this means that the seller has to get the updated resale certificate. But if buyer requires an updated resale certificate, seller at buyer's expense, but the buyer pays for it. And they shall deliver it within 10 days after receiving payment. So it doesn't really give a buyer a right to back out. It just says seller has to provide it at the buyer's expense, except for if the buyer doesn't get it within the 10 days, then they can get their earnest money back. So that would be the case if you have all the subdivision information, but you just need an updated resale certificate. 4, buyer does not require delivery of the subdivision information. Okay. So you see, sometimes, I don't know why my mouse is acting funny. Sometimes you see box 4 being checked, especially if it's, especially if it's already loaded up in the addendums. Because the seller just want, the listing agent is going to want that box being checked. So they don't, the buyer doesn't have any rights to back out due to the subdivision information. Negotiate how you want. I mean, I'm not going to say what for you to what to do. I would like your buyer to get the subdivision information. You're saying, Ryan, I can call the title company and just get the deed restrictions straight from the title company. You can. Oftentimes the title companies will give that to you at no charge. I'm not saying all the time. I'm saying sometimes, but you won't have the resale certificate. And sometimes the lender requires the resale certificate before closing. At least, very least, if you're in a multiple offer situation and you check that box, get the restrictions for your buyer within the option period so you can review them. And then ask the title company how much the resale certificate costs inside your option period. I'm just giving you advice at the very least. Okay, title company or its agent is authorized to act on behalf of the parties. Basically, the title company is allowed to order the information. Just giving that permission in there. Okay. Material changes. If seller becomes aware of any material change in the subdivision information, seller shall promptly give notice to buyer. Buyer may terminate the contract to closing. Okay, that's doesn't happen often. Fee. Let me make this simple for you guys, and I had to learn this, and I actually played it off to my buyer's advantage. I was representing the buyer. Let me do a little. I like to give examples, real life examples. I was selling a house. It was on End Away, and it. Let me see if I can find it.
What?
If you need to ask a question, unmute yourself, but if not, can you mute yourself? So, because I'm getting a little background information. So, let me see, wait a minute. On End Away, but that's not. So, it was in this neighborhood. It was in Aliena in Richmond. I contacted the title company. It was my buyer, remember? And I said, title company, how much is the HOA transfer fee? They told me the HOA transfer fee was $500. You're saying, Ryan, that's pretty simple. $500 transfer fee from the HOA. Yep. Okay. I said, what else is required to transfer the property from one name to the other? They told me, wow, not many agents ask us that, but we'll give you the answer. There's a $1,200 entrance fee and a $1,200 exit fee. I said, is that required by the HOA? They said, yes, at closing via transfer of the property. We have to collect that. So I said, let me get this straight. 1,200 plus 1,200 plus 500. Guys, so I had to write my math down. That's almost $3,000, $2,900. Is that a chunk of change? It is to me. Maybe not to you, but it is to me. So I said, but wait a minute. It doesn't say transfer fee. It says entrance and exit fee. She said, yeah, that's how the HOA has it written in their bylaws. $500 transfer fee, $1,200 entrance fee, $1,200 exit fee. I said, enough said. Me, I know the HOA addendum like the back of my hand. I've taken several classes on it, including obviously 18 years of experience. Here's where classes and extra credit classes play to your advantage. I'm going to tell you right now. I had in this paragraph $500. The listing agent in the seller accepted my contract. It was an executed contract and signatures were all over the board. Executed addendum. You're saying, Ryan, paragraph C says fees and deposits for reserves, except as provided by paragraph A and D. Buyer shall pay any and all association fees, deposits, reserves, and other charges associated with the transfer of the property not to exceed blank, and seller shall pay the rest. So how much money was my buyer on the hook for paying in this situation to transfer the property? $500. It says it right there. But wait a minute, the entrance and exit fee and the transfer fee totaled $2,900. I'll get to that in a minute. Here's where I come in with my knowledge. We were at closing and the title company had the $500 fee charged to my buyer, the $1,200 entrance fee charged to my buyer, and the $1,200 exit fee charged to the listing agent or the seller. And I stopped the closing and I said, this is why it's important to go to your closing and look over the statement. In this particular chance, the title company didn't email me the statement the day before. Upon my request, they still didn't do it because paperwork was delayed. It happens. But I went to my closing and I reviewed it right then. I said, stop the train. Why is my buyer paying for the entrance fee? They said, the title company said, because you're the buyer. You're the one entering the property. That's what we always do. The buyer pays the entrance fee, the seller pays the exit fee, and the buyer pays the $500 transfer fee. And I said, that's not what my paperwork says. I don't care what tradition is. I care about what the paperwork says. And she goes, oh, I know where you're getting at. I said, I think you do. I said, my addendum says $500, doesn't it? She says, yes, it does. I said, so I'm going to pay my buyer. I say I when I'm representing my buyer. My buyer, who was sitting right next to me, by the way, didn't have a clue what this addendum even was. Sometimes they don't read it. They just want you to do your job. And I said, my buyer is not paying that. She said, oh man, a seller is going to have a fit. I don't care. I could care less. My addendum says, you're saying, Ryan, wait a minute, the transfer fee was $500. That was called an entrance and exit fee. Time out. It says any other charges associated with the transfer of the property. Does that make sense? The entrance and exit fee, what I said, is it to do with the transfer of the property? And she said, yes, it is. I said, then my buyer's not paying it. He's paying up to $500. And that's where we stop. So she rolled over the $1,200 entrance fee to the seller and it closed and they signed it. Why? Because this is what the addendum said. Now, don't we want to be cautious with our HOAs now? Don't we want to make sure we fill this out? Now, let me do it. Some listing agents want you to put all here or all transfer. Guess what, guys? Letters don't work in this line. You're not allowed to put letters. I get it. If it had said all, then my buyer probably would have had to pay for all of it, probably including the exit fee. But first off, you don't need to put all. Second off, you shouldn't even be putting numbers in here, letters in here. It should be numbers. Okay. Authorization, it just gives seller authorizes. Here's another good one. So we went over what's due at closing or for the transfer of the property at closing. Right here. To do with charges associated with the transfer of the property. Now let's go over what if the resale certificate is required before closing. So let me give you a hint, guys. C is at closing. D is anything required up front or before closing or while you're in escrow. Seller authorizes, guys, I'll give you the cheat sheet on it, but let me read it. Seller authorizes the association, meaning the HOA, to release and provide the subdivision information and any updated resale certificate if requested by the buyer, the title company, or any broker to the sale. If buyer does not require the subdivision information or any updated resale certificate and the title company requires information, such as the status of dues, special assessments, violation of covenants and restrictions, and a waiver of the right of first refusal, buyer or seller may pay the title company the cost of obtaining, no, shall pay, not may, the cost of obtaining. So meaning, if this wasn't already negotiated up here, and the buyer just said, I don't need it, I don't want it, and they marked box 4, the title company or the lender still may require their resale certificate. I already said that. In order to close the property, they may need things such as status of the dues, meaning if there are any HOA dues that are behind. Special assessments, I said that. There might be what was special assessments? It was an assessment charged to each homeowner. I'll give you an example. An HOA that I came across needed some piers for their lakes. They actually needed them removed because they were rotting and falling apart. Each pier cost money to remove. But that wasn't in the HOA budget because they didn't expect the piers to rot and eventually and basically need to be trashed. Well, each homeowner in that subdivision was charged an individual amount of money, equal amount of money to pay for those piers to be removed. Okay. Well, if one property was being transferred at that moment, then a special assessment would then possibly be charged by that new buyer, depending on when the special assessment was due. So the title companies need to find that out. Violation of covenants, if there's any violations, HOA violations. Basically, everything, all of this stuff is on a resale certificate, by the way. That's why the title companies usually just order the resale certificate. But sometimes they just order the subdivision information and ask the HOA to provide this information. Okay. A waiver of the right of the first refusal. So first refusals, we're really not going to get into that. That usually is to do in a condo association with condos. So who is paying for this information if the buyer didn't require it, but the title company or the lender is in fact requiring it? Well, it's either buyer or seller. But before you mark whichever box, depending on who you're representing, you may want to find out how much basically the subdivision, the resale certificate costs, because your lender or the title company is probably going to need a copy of all this stuff 99% of the time before closing. So this is going to determine who pays for that. And it may not be labeled resale certificate. It may be labeled subdivision information. It may be labeled just a HOA packet. Usually the title company will call your buyer or your seller and say, look, I need you to pay for this. It's usually upfront because I need the information in order to gather it up for closing. Because the title company, they're giving a title policy on this house. They want to make sure there's no backed HOA dues, and they want to also verify exactly what the HOA dues are, and they want to verify all this. They may have go ahead and pull the restrictions. So this determines if you're buyer. So let me give you an example. I've got a entrance exit fee. I've got a transfer fee, and I know my lender is going to need the title company is going to require, or the lender is going to require the subdivision information. I know this, or the title company is going to need it. So it's my buyer. So I'm going to say, okay, the transfer fee, but let's say there's no entrance and exit fee. Let's cut that out. Let's make this simple. I know that the transfer fee, according to my other listing, the transfer fee was $150. Let's say it's a pretty simple situation, but in the resale certificate is $300. So I put in here 150, and I put in that my buyer is going to pay for the resale certificate if it's required by the lender. Well, the buyer says, okay, I mean, I'm not in love with this, but I really want the property and I don't want any stumbling blocks, and I want to make sure the seller accepts my offer. Well, if you've done your research, you know that the transfer fee is $150. So add that to their closing costs. And you know that they're going to need a resale certificate because their lender told you they would, but you already done your research and you know the resale certificate is $300. So 300 plus 150 is $450. That's probably not going to make or break them. But you know that because you've already done your research and you found out from the title company, or you called the HOA direct. The number is usually on the HAR right here, Aliana. There's their number. And you ask Aliana, is there any entrance fees? Is there any exit fees? Is there any special assessments? Is there any other assessments due at closing? So, and then they're gonna say, well, this is all what's required. So. Another big question to ask them is there a capitalization fee due at closing? Because Bridgeland charges a one-time fee at closing. I think it's $1,500, and it's a percentage of the property. I forget now, it's been a little while, but it's called a capitalization fee, but it's due at closing. So remember, that would also be included. So think about it. What if you were and I'll end it with this. What if you were the listing agent and there was a $1,000 capitalization fee? Remember, capitalization fee is a one-time charge for future endeavors for the HOA improvements or repairs. What if it was $1,000 and you were the listing agent? Meaning you represented the seller, and this had $800 in here. But let's say the capitalization fee was $1,000 and the transfer fee was $1,000. Well, then you would have to understand and make your sellers understand that the buyers pay 800 of it. But remember, $1,000 transfer fee and $1,000 assessment, that's $2,000. So now your sellers would be on the hook for $1,200. And if they're okay with that, then have them sign. But you need to be knowledgeable about that up front. Okay, guys, with them. All right. Now that I've talked my lungs off about that, I hope y'all really understand how important that is. Buyer's representation agreement, let's touch base on that. When you have a buyer, the first thing you need to do before you even take them out and show them houses is you need to have them pre-qualified. You need to have them sign a buyer's representation agreement and the IABS, information about broker services, which should be a given to you by now. The IABS is pretty simple to fill out. The client information goes here, their address, phone number. Most time they don't have a fax. You can just leave that blank. Your information goes here, that it's as far as Texas United, your phone number, your email. Then you're going to go to definitions, meaning what market area are you going to show them in? Most time people use a broad range. Sometimes you put it in zip codes, but you don't want to limit that, because what if they end up changing their mind and wanting to kind of move somewhere else? You want to just keep it broad. Greater Houston area is a good idea. Terms, you want to put today's date. It's like the contract between you and them. And you can pick 3, 6, or 12 months out. I like to go longer with my buyers. You're like, man, if I can't find him a house in 12 months, what? But sometimes I hate to say this, guys, it's taken me 12 months to find my buyer a house before. But I close on a lot of properties. So that's just another one in the pipeline. And I'm working on other deals as well. So you guys got to remember, y'all got to juggle multiple balls when you're in real estate, and you got to wear many hats. I think you probably started figuring that out. Okay, I'm going to go through this because I spent a long time on the HOA. It talks about broker's obligation. Your obligation is to assist the client, and their obligation, meaning they can't work with another broker. Talks about that in representations. Intermediary allows you to show them other properties that might be listed by Texas United Realty. Usually they don't have a problem with that, but they do need to give permission, which is another reason why it's important to have a buyer representation in place. It talks about broker's fees. Of course, I want 3%. Normally that is paid for by the seller anyway. So, but it just protects you to make sure you get your 3%. It's mostly protecting you from them being able to walk away and use a different brokerage in that time period, because they have a contract with you essentially. Talks about payments, compensation, service providers. It talks about if you provide them with like a third party, like maybe an inspector. Protection, meaning if the contract ends and then they basically, let's say you show them a property on 123 Main Street and your contract, this contract ends and you didn't extend it, but then they end up still wanting to buy that property. It still protects you because you showed that property, or you were the procuring cause of that property. Okay. And you check all your addendums. Again, you can go ahead and have them sign some of these addendums up front. It'd probably be a good idea. That way you don't have to have them sign everything else once you do a contract. Go ahead and have them sign the IABS, the information about property insurance, this one, as well as the information about flood hazards. I would go ahead and have them sign this one too. I always have my clients sign that. So it's pretty simple, guys. They need to initial and sign, and it's pretty simple. It protects you, kind of gives them a kind of it really, it's the way, well, they don't want to sign something right off the bat. Well, it's all in the presentation, as Amy, our office manager, says. It's like, look, guys, I'm here to help you. I can show you any property that's on the market. It doesn't matter who it's listed by. And this just secures that if I'm going to put in the work, I'm going to get paid at closing. So it's just all on how you say it. But I will let y'all be. I probably talked enough, and we've tried to keep these pretty short. Let me open it up to Q&As. I'm going to read some of these. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask questions. So let me read this one. I have a question. If you are the listing agent, and if we get the seller to pay for the HOA info, we can't ask the buyer to pay for it after the seller did. Laisha, you may want to unmute and clarify. If the HOA addendum is already signed by both parties, no, there's no renegotiating that. Unfortunately, you negotiate it when you present the offer. So as the buyer's agent, you're the one that should be filling out the HOA addendum and hopefully slating it more towards your buyer's comfort. Okay. But if there's multiple offers, sometimes you can't get away with your buyer having their cake and eating it too. So it's a negotiable item, and you need to make sure that you discuss the options with your buyer. And the options meaning they're going to ask you, well, how much is the transfer fee? Well, yeah, we might pay for it, but we want to know how much it is. And that's why it's good to do some of the research up front. But yes, it's negotiable. But once that HOA addendum is signed, it's not negotiable anymore.
I'm asking, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. I was just asking because I went to a class today, and the lady that was teaching the class had said something about trying to get the HOA information in, like in the listing option, like before, like, I don't know, she just said something about the listing option, and then that to get your seller, like if you're the listing agent, to get the seller to pay for it, and that the seller would not want to pay for it, but that it's best for them to pay for it. So that's why I was asking.
I mean, some of these classes, they're not really teaching real life scenarios. I like to teach more real life. So there's multiple facets to what she just said, if I'm reading it right. So if you do, let's say, a 7-day option period, that means from the execution till the 7th day at 5 p.m., you have the right, your buyer has the right to back out. Mostly they use that for their inspections, right? But if you read the contract, it says you have a 7-day option to back out, period. For no reason at all. I like to tell my buyers, if you stub your foot on the doorstop and you decide that it's bad karma and you hate the house now, you could back out. If your option period is written in there, okay, you lose your option fee, but you can back out. So if you want to get the HOA or the deed restrictions inside your option period, and they read the deed restrictions and there's something in there they don't like, then they can back out. In the option period, you can back out for any reason. But the HOA addendum covers you for additional, but it's negotiable. And if the HOA addendum is marked box 4, meaning the buyer didn't have the right to back out due to the deed restrictions, and the buyer is paying for the transfer fee up to $500, then they're obligated to pay at closing up to $500 for the transfer fee or the transfer costs associated with the transfer. So there's multifacets to that. They have an option period, yes, but the HOA addendum is negotiable, and but also let's say there's 10 offers on a listing, and you're the 11th offer, and you ask the seller to pay, all the transfer fees and pay for, and the buyer has a 10-day right to back out due to the HOA deed restrictions or subdivision information. To be honest, the street the street value of what I'm about to tell you is they may not pick your offer. Because they're gonna maybe pick another offer that the buyer didn't have they marked box 4. They don't want an out because of the HOA. What I like to do is I like to try and get, if the buyer is not already familiar with the subdivision, I like to at least get them a copy of the deed restrictions and tell them, look, review the deed restrictions. If there's something you don't like, then let me know. But let's not make that another, I guess, reason the seller might not want to pick our offer. But if there's not a multiple offer situation, then yeah, the power is more in the buyer's hand. So yes, I kind of slate it more towards my buyer. I'll usually see if the seller will pay for the subdivision information, give my buyer like a 10-day right to get that, and then 3 days after that to review it. And then I try to negotiate the transfer fee. Like if it's $1,000 transfer fee, I might write in that box $500 and like split it with the seller. Okay. But if you don't know what the transfer fee is, then you won't really know what you're negotiating. You could play it safe and put in that box. You could put in you could put in like $250 and the buyer understands that, let's say you're making the offer. It's oftentimes I make the offer, it's middle of the night and you're like, I don't have the information. I can't call the title company in the middle of the night. So what I'll do, where is my homeowners? I keep losing this information. Here we go. So what I'll do is I'll write it up where I'll say, okay, well, I'll at least give my buyer 10 days, even if they have to pay for it, fine. But I'll at least give them 10 days to get it. And then I'll make my buyer understand that you have to pay for it. And I'll cap this at like 250. And that means you're protecting your buyer that they will only have to pay $250 towards the transfer of the property. But if you mark this box, then that means they have to pay for the subdivision information. If they're not comfortable with that, then you would mark this box and make the seller pay for it and give the seller 10 days. But if this is signed, if this is marked like this, and this is signed by all parties, there's no more negotiating. In your option period, technically, could you renegotiate it? Yes, but it's very hard to get the seller to renegotiate that even during your option period. Typically, the seller only wants to renegotiate repairs. Okay, so let's move on. What if the property has a lien by a third party? Well, that's a different question. The lien will be found by the title company. And then if the lien isn't cleared, then your buyer has a right. That's where your 1 to 4 talks about. Your 1 to 4 contract. So I'll show you that. Guys, if you've already got all your questions answered, you don't have to stay on. I'm just making sure I get all the answers. Someone asked about the third party. Let me find my 1 to 4. Let me stop the recording because
Hey, Ryan,